And now, on This Week in History with Paul Waite.
I am Paul Waite, and this is Headmaster Waite. So all of you driving your cars, sitting at home on your armchairs, cutting the lawn, splashing around.
Mowing the lawn.
Trimming your bush.
I suppose if you're splashing around, you'll probably find it quite hard to listen to me. But anyway, you pay attention, you might learn something. So we have on This Week in History, and these are events on various days that lead up to the 27th of June.
Haha.
Yes. So the first one was picked out of mine and Callum's love for the Vikings and also the Last Kingdom. So in 843, the Vikings destroyed Nantes.
Nantes.
Yes, in northern France, obviously.
Nantes.
Yes, naughty the Vikingos.
Francia.
Was that
Try
one?
not to be quite so odd. So next we have, it's an interesting one, this. So I think this is obviously disputed, and Callum will tell me why it's disputed, because he'll know the answer to this. In 930, the world's oldest parliament was established in Iceland. So why do you think I dispute that?
Because the Tynwald in the Isle of Man is the oldest parliament in the world, I think you'll find.
No, actually, nobody knows. Is the actual answer?
Do you know what I think the actual answer is?
No.
I think that the Tynwald is the oldest continual parliament. I think the Icelandic parliament was maybe slightly earlier, but went through stages of being disbanded, so to speak. So, although it might claim to be the oldest, it's not the oldest continual one. Whereas what's amazing about the Tynwald is that ever since it was established, it has reigned supreme on the island.
Well, all I can say is I did bother to research this, so I could, and actually that's not. I couldn't find that as being true. So basically, all that historians know for sure is the Tynwald was definitely there in 1200. The Manx themselves claim it to be older than the Icelandic Parliament, but I couldn't find anything conclusively.
I trust the Manx.
And of course, the Tynwald itself is a Viking word, and it was the Vikings who founded the Tynwald themselves.
Good old
Callum and I have
diplomacy.
been to Tynwald several times, I'd say. Yeah.
I've probably been 4 times.
In fact, I was talking about. I had a meeting last week with a guy who does a lot of cycling, and he was amazed at my achievement with the John O'Groats thing. And I was telling him about the time we met the Manx cycling team. You know, Cavendish and all the Commonwealth cyclists, and they were basically saying that they couldn't believe that someone could cycle.
Yeah.
'Cause they used to cycle in the peloton, didn't they?
Yeah.
So that was.
What I think is really cool about the Tynwald, so just before we continue, compared to, say, like the British Parliament, whatever, is in the Tynwald building, they have like a massive broadsword on a table in between. At the beginning of every single Tynwald sort of, whatever you want to say, like meeting, you know, when they all get together and discuss whatever, they all have to like raise it and be like, which I just think is like, that's like Game of Thrones, isn't it?
So in 1314, the Battle of Bannockburn, and the Scottish regained independence. So I think this would probably have been from Edward II, I'm guessing.
Who was the bad Edward, wasn't he?
Yes, well, it depends on your point of view. So the good Edward, therefore, in Callum's speak, is
First and the third.
the Hammer of the Scots, Edward I, who was a not very nice man, very ruthless man.
But a very good king.
Edward II was a very weak man by comparison. So the thing most interesting about Bannockburn, from my point of view, is I've been there. So I think I was only about 10 years old when I first went to Bannockburn.
I'd like to go to Bannockburn.
I've been to I've been to Flodden, Bannockburn, Culloden, and Stirling Castle, Dungleen, all the castles in Scotland. Really, really interesting. Next, we're on to a fascinating story. In 1483, the Duke of Gloucester, Richard III, became the king after the Parliament declares Edward V illegitimate. Now, this has to be one of the worst. You know, obviously, one has to understand that standards were very different in 1483. But I just find the whole thing about Richard III, you know, effectively the betrayal of his brother's children. So, you know, opportunistically engineered a situation where effectively his nephew he declared him to be illegitimate, which was ridiculous if you look at the evidence. And then, of course, the two princes in the tower, as they're called, were never seen again. Richard III's gone down in history, obviously, with Shakespeare as this hunchback, my horse, my king for a horse, and is very much portrayed by Shakespeare as the man that killed the princes, although there is actually no conclusive evidence to show that he did or he didn't. So, of course, his day in the sun didn't last very long.
No.
2 years later, we had the Battle of Bosworth Field, where Henry VII, Henry Tudor, effectively representing the Lancastrians, defeated Richard. The victory that was possibly really only possible because of the treasonous or traitorous behaviour of the Percy family, who came from the northeast, who was sitting basically as the cavalry behind Richard III, and then when the heat came on, they basically all rode off the battlefield and left Richard. And actually, as a Welshman who was actually considered to have slain him.
Oh, really?
I did actually know his name once, but
That's interesting, isn't it?
1498, the toothbrush was invented in China by Colgate. I was actually hoping that Drew was going to say really then.
He's becoming wise to your tricks, sir.
Okay. We've actually managed to go over 6 minutes. I can't believe it. 1535, Cardinal John Fisher is beheaded at Tower Hill. One thing, I always am massively impressed by people who are prepared to make the final sacrifice because of their beliefs. So basically, Cardinal John Fisher, I think he was the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time or something like that. So basically, Henry said, like, I'm the head of the church now, and Fisher said, no, you're not, the Pope is. And Henry said, no, I am. And Fisher said, no, the Pope is. And he said, you keep saying that, you're going to end up being dead. And Fisher said, no, the Pope's the head of the
See,
church.
this is more reason why you are like Henry VIII. See? More and more evidence of why you're like Henry VIII.
What's that supposed to be?
Because I could imagine you saying something the same. I'm the head of the church now, and then someone going, Paul, no, I'm not. And you're like, I'll give you one more chance, right? I'm the head of the church now. And then they said it. Sorry, mate, you're hung, drawn, and quartered.
Okay, fair enough. We'll come back to that in a minute.
Cardinal John.
So this is a beautiful, beautiful song by Evanescence and My Immortal.
On This Week in History.
Yeah, Callum has just been telling me and Drew why I'm like Henry VIII. I couldn't possibly repeat it, so P45 is not in the post. The only thing I will say about that is my father used to call me Henry VIII very playfully because of my love of chicken. So I was often found after a roast dinner going out into the kitchen and attacking whatever was left.
So Henry VIII was known for eating 3 or 4 chickens a day.
Whoa.
And when my old man was notorious, he would just eat loads and loads of chicken when he was younger.
Yeah, thank you, mate. So heading on, 1743, the War of the Austrian Succession and the Battle of Dettingen. I actually didn't know this. So this was the last time that King of England led his troops into battle.
Really?
1743, George II. So quite, and of course we won as well, so that's even better.
Hey!
1746, a lady who's gone down in history, and one of these two boys will surely be wise enough to tell me what song is written after her. Flora MacDonald helped Bonnie Prince Charlie escape. Speed, Bonnie
boy, like a bird on a wing over the hill sky.
The sea to sky.
Sea to sky.
Because she rode him away, she took him away in a boat.
I actually quite like that song.
Yeah, it's a good song.
Outlander.
1806, very interesting fact this. Buenos Aires was captured by the British.
Argentina!
Yeah, so Argentina obviously founded by the Spanish. The British delighted in causing mischief in all the Spanish colonies, etc. But one of the things that's quite sad, because obviously we don't, because of the Falklands War, although it's an improving situation, Britain actually was responsible for the development of Argentina, certainly after its independence, and we were singly responsible for the building of all of their railway network.
I was going to say the train.
You're welcome, Argentina.
I happen to know that. 1857, the first 62 recipients of being awarded the Victoria Cross. So Victoria Cross was only invented in 1862. And of course, you know, Callum, what the the crosses are made out of.
Silver.
Aren't they like the melted cannons of the French and the Spanish?
They're the cannons of the Crimean War.
The Crimean War, sorry, yeah. So it would be the Russians.
Yes, I bet you didn't know who the war was between, Crimean War or China.
The Ottoman Empire and the British Empire and the Russians, essentially, isn't it?
Russians were on the side of the Turks.
Yeah.
Us and France against Russia and Turkey.
That's what I meant, yeah. So the Ottoman Empire and Russia against Britain.
So
and
this
France.
is obviously where Florence Nightingale became a legend in the hospitals of Scutari. Yeah.
And as we mentioned before, isn't the Crimean War was the war where the Victoria Cross first got given out, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Something I know quite a lot about, and is an interesting character, not in a good way. 1876, Custer's Last Stand.
General Custer.
George Custer, a very flamboyant guy with hair as long as Callum's.
And a beard.
Yeah.
Golden beard, apparently.
The US 7th Cavalry was wiped out by a combination of Sioux and Cheyenne forces, headed by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull.
Great names.
Well, yeah, just legends. Huge defender of native Red Indian rights and respect of the histories and things that the American settlers and governments did to them was just shocking, and still is today. One of the things I'm quite surprised at is my parents are also quite interested in the sort of atrocity thing. And my mum,
Well, they love the Wild West.
my mum was telling me about a story she read about something that's only just materialised in the last year.
What's that then?
Of a village of Red Indians having been given lots of reparations, and then apparently they were silently all killed, which has just come out as a story.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so making good progress now, catching up the deficit. In 1887, it was Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. So Queen Victoria became I think we did this last week. Queen Victoria became the Queen of England in 1837, succeeding her uncle, William IV, who had lots of mistresses but no children. After a very bad start to her reign, where, as I was telling you, Callum, numerous assassination attempts were made against her life, she did become a fairly respected, I suppose. I'm not sure you could actually use the word loved. I'm not sure you could use that.
Reigned until 1901.
Didn't Elizabeth II only like a couple of years ago overtake her as the longest reigning monarch of all time?
I think we're going to do one final fact before we head off for another track, which is the immortal Andy Williams. Lovely song, Can't Get Used to Losing You. In 1917, a guy called Venizelos became the Prime Minister of Greece and severed the relationship with the Central Powers. So I didn't actually know this. So from 1914 to 17, Greece fought on the side of the Germans, which is probably to do with their positioning in the Balkans, and probably that was more to do with them being anti-Serbian. Although it does rot. Perhaps maybe they were. I don't know. I have to look into this. Maybe they still had some ties with the Ottoman Empire, and that's why they had to do it. But anyway, in 1917, along came Venizelos, and he said no. And from then on, the Greeks fought on the side of the Brits.
We traditionally get on very well, don't we, with the Greeks?
Oh, very, very, very much so.
And I really felt that when I go to Greece as well.
Yeah, they feel the same about you, mate. So it's Andy Williams.
Bringing you the news of old on This Week in History with Paul Waite.
Welcome back to the final instalment of On This Week in History. This week, so over we go. So we're going to hit off in 1941. And in 1941, we have two facts in 1941 actually. Finland declares war on the Soviet Union. This was, and I suppose that's why, to some extent, the Finns were on the same side as the Germans, because it was impossible not to be.
Yeah, they're probably the only country I forgive for being on the side of
maybe
the Germans.
So you have to say, as a student of history and military and battles and things and strategy, I think the Finns' achievement in the time they fought against the Russians would be right up there in the. I think you compare it with Battle of Marathon, for instance.
I think I read some statistics that they were something like their tanks were outnumbered like 100 to 1, and their force, they're like man for man, they're outnumbered something like 1,000 to 1. Crazy.
I think 1,000 to 1 sounds a lot, but it was a lot.
It was something. Yeah, those aren't exact, obviously, but it was like a ridiculous statistic.
But probably the best.
I'll look it up.
The best fighters in a Arctic, snowy type situation
won't find better in the tundra
in the world. So they did end up not losing but not winning, and they had to give away. I think it's Karelia that Finland lost to the Soviet Union as a result of that war. 1941, which led to this to some extent. We have Operation Barbarossa, where the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. So of course, one of the reasons why I find it very difficult to sort of take the Russians too seriously as our allies is obviously they only became our allies because the country they were fighting with, being the Germans, invaded them.
Yeah, sure.
So Hitler, as we've discussed many times, Hitler repeated the mistake that Napoleon Bonaparte made. If you think about the position of the Germans at this point in time, they've basically run riot through Europe. They're in charge of Norway, Belgium, Holland, France, Poland, Czech Republic. Obviously, Austria's become part of Germany. They basically are preeminent. The Italians are on their side. Spain is neutral, as is Portugal, I think. And of course, they thought they would. They thought that we wouldn't fight them, really. That we had no real stomach for the fight. Of course, this led to the Battle of Britain, and that led really to a position where the Germans were unable to invade us.
Yep.
Now, it's got to be. It's very easy with hindsight. Everything's easy with hindsight. So the decision to invade the Soviet Union has got to be probably the worst looking back of ever.
Biggest military blunder.
For a period of time, quite a long period of time, it was incredibly successful, very much like Napoleon. So
Until winter set in.
They basically they were complacent. They didn't march into the Soviet Union with the right clothes, with the right weapons, the right support, the right everything.
Was it Stalingrad or Leningrad?
Stalingrad, yeah.
Yeah, they basically just lost. Was it over 1 million troops? Wasn't
ridiculous.
it? Germans lost over 1 million troops.
Yeah, and of course, what happened afterwards? The Russians probably the worst people in the time to be kept a prisoner by.
Oh yeah.
So there we are. 1948, the United Nations Charter was signed by 50 nations. That probably may be, I may be controversial in saying this. When you imagine the horror of the Second World War, it's just ended. You just imagine the hope and the optimism that would have prevailed in the world when the United Nations was formed. But what's the point? There's no point in having the United Nations, really, is it? All the United Nations does is issue sanctions against people who aren't really a threat, and the people who really are a threat, like North Korea and China.
To be honest, the United Nations is a joke. Let's say it how it is. It is a joke.
So, 1957. This is a funny one. The British Medical Research Council published a report saying there was a direct link between smoking and lung cancer. So it's just staggering, isn't it? So this is only 3 years before I was born.
Yeah, mad.
And I happen to know this for a fact. Right through the 30s and 40s, people actually thought that smoking was good for you.
Yeah, I've heard the comparison made was that doctors used to say that it would strengthen your lungs the same way that the stress of exercise strengthens your muscles.
Quite extraordinary.
It's mad.
So, 1976, The Omen premieres in the USA.
Oh.
The reason I put that in is it is my idea of the best horror film of all time. Fantastic acting, just brilliant script. I just love the whole sort of play on taking stuff out of Revelations and bringing it to life in such a dynamic way. Wonderful performance from Sam Neill. Just a great trilogy. I think I'm not sure as Paul of today whether I could actually sit down and watch it all again. But on the same note, I've got four left to do very quickly. In 1982, and I went to this the premiere of this film when it came out. Wonderful film, Blade Runner, which was obviously produced and directed by Ridley Scott, with my favourite actor of the time being Harrison Ford playing the lead role, and an actor that Callum and I both love. I know, in Rutger Hauer.
Oh, yeah.
Who's a great Dutch actor. He played the the sort of, were they baddies, or you could actually argue they were the goodies, who were the sort of android-y type characters. They're called replicants, I think.
Yeah, replicants. That's what they're called. Yeah.
Rutger Hauer played the head of that, and of course there was the whole thing about the woman that Harrison Ford's character fell in love with was probably herself a replicant, but you'll never actually know for sure.
I think there's even a rumour that he was himself.
No, I don't think. Anyway, and of course it's been remade now, Blade Runner 49 with.
I don't think it's.
I think it's Gosling, and I saw the end of it with him and anyway, 1991, Slovenia and Croatia declared independence from Yugoslavia, and next one very interesting for both of us. 2006, one of my favourite, I can't really call it a planet anymore, although I consider it to be a planet. Pluto's planets were discovered named Nix and Hydra. So Pluto is a hugely interesting object, let's call it that. Well worth a few hours of research, people. And finally, in 2016, a momentous day in British history, the United Kingdom voted for Brexit. That was On This Week in History. I am Outstanding Paul, and this is Lindsay Buckingham.
Available now on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at aspenwaiteradio.com.